We are in Hebrews, finishing up. And if I can get Miss Bettina, if you will, since Lady Joy is not here, in just a moment. But first we're going to read, as we always do, 11 and 1, kids. You want to lead that for us?
For now,
Faith is the substance of things hoped for, and evidence of things not seen. For by faith, Rhonda obtained a good report.
Amen.
Amen. Hallelujah. All right. So, we are going to look at the Amplified Version. Hebrews 11, and we left off at verse 32, I do believe.
Amen.
And that verse begins, and what shall I say further? For time would be fell to me of Gideon, Barak, and we left off with Samson. We were studying Samson in Judges chapter 13, I do believe. Can you catch us up to Tina where we left off at?
We ended on chapter.
Here you go.
Yes, we ended on chapter 15, and the chapters before that, from 13 to 15, we was talking about how Samson wanted to marry a Philistine. Although his parents didn't agree with that, he married her anyway. And how they didn't know that God had already condoned their ordained. And we was talking about how sometimes parents don't know what God has for their children, so you have to also pray and ask God to let you know what's going on in that child's life. And we ended with that. We started on it last week, but we never did talk about anything else.
All right, so we ended at the end of 14 going into 15. And 15 is when he began his vengeance on the Philistines.
Yes.
So we all are pretty much familiar with that story, but let's read it. I'm going to read it in the my NIV version. But I want to pull it up on the Amplified as well. In the Amplified it says, but some days later in the time of wheat harvest, Samson went to visit his wife, taking along a kid as a token of reconciliation. And he said, I will go unto my wife in the inner chamber, but her father would not allow him to go in. And her father said, I truly thought you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is her younger sister not fairer than she? Take her, I pray you instead. And Samson said of them, this time shall be blameless as regards the evil Philistines, though I do them evil. So Samson went and caught 300 foxes, or jackals, and took torches and turned the foxes' tails to tail. He put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set the torches ablaze, he let the foxes go into the standing of grain of the Philistines, and he burned up the shocks and the standing grain along with the olive orchards. Then the Philistines said, who has done this? And they were told Samson, the son-in-law of the Temanite. because he, the Timnite, has taken Samson's wife and has given her to a companion. And the Philistine came up and burned her and her father with fire. And Samson said to them, if this is the way you act, surely I will take revenge on you, and after that I will quit. And he smote them hip and thigh unsparingly, and great slaughter, and he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Edom. Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah and spread them in Lehi. And then the men of Judah said, why have you come against us? And they answered, we have come up to bind Samson, to do to him as he has done to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock Edom and said to Samson, have you not known that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is this that you have done to us? And he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. And they said to him, we have come down to bind you, that we may deliver you in the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not fall upon you yourselves. And they said to him, no, we will bind you fast and give you into their hands, but surely we will not kill you. So they bound him with 2 ropes and brought him up to the rock, up from the rock. I'm going to stop right there. So basically, his own people was the first to betray him. They were the ones who took him in to the Philistines. When I read that, it basically reminded me, you may read in some of your readings that Samson was similar to Christ. And we're going to read further into the Delilah, but we're not going to jump ahead. And she was to me a Judah. With that being said, and what he did, and how he went about it, what part of that do y'all think was Christ-like? What part of that shows him walking in his purpose? We all know Samson was a strong man, basically chosen by God. His strengths he violated God by going against him and the things that he chose with the widows and going into taking revenge when things did not come his way.
So when you read that, I was sitting there thinking, and it was the circumstances are similar to what happened to the Christ. I think one of the things that, and I believe one of the things that happened with Samson was you talk about an eye for an eye and so forth. So Samson, in essence, allowed his emotions to get involved and not continuing to operate through his faith. He took in the vengeance on his own rather than letting the vengeance be of the Lord. So in doing so, there were things that were happening that, yes, it could have been done a different way. He could have stayed in faith and allowed the Lord to do these things to these individuals or bring the vengeance upon those individuals. But he went into his emotional state rather than staying in his faithful state. And we often talk about, operating out of faith and not out of emotions. So, and I know that the story goes on and there's more to that because of the emotional state of Samson and so forth and him, losing certain things or not losing certain things, but being suppressed in the things that God has given him until he comes back into faith again and getting his renewed strength again. But I do believe that, the more that we fall into, our emotions. And I know that I have had those thoughts as well back in the day, you do this to me, I'm going to do it to you, but I'm going to do it to you 10 times harder than what you did it to me. Okay. And things like that. And sometimes those thoughts may still come upon us at times, even in our workplace, even in any wrongdoing that somebody do to us. Sometimes our first inclination is, okay, well, yeah, they shouldn't have done that. And I'm going to get them back for that. Or we pray something against them, and instead of praying for them, we pray things against them like, Lord, asking the Lord to do your dirty work in a sense of what you would do. You want the Lord to do to them. But the Lord may not do that in the way that we would think that we want it to be done. Losing loved ones, people cutting us out of promotions, people interfering in our lives, making things happen that shouldn't happen. And of course here, it was Samson's wife and father. But when you look at those things, it's like trying to stay out of an emotional state when circumstances and event change, that causes us that goes against our faith and our belief in God.
Thank you, Vincent. Yes, one thing I can say about Samson and all of this, he was always persistent in making sure that he accomplished what he set out to do. Although it was from an emotional standpoint, he definitely went forth in being consistent in taking control of a situation. And that's something that we need to do, but also not from an emotional standpoint. We need to let God walk us through. He was chosen from birth, prior to birth, actually, just like Christ was, to be put into a place and serve a purpose and a time, and to lead the people out of it, bondage. And that is something that when you look at Samson, most of the stories that you look up on him, you'll look up and do some research, you only see negative responses of him, and I'm going to get into those notes that I study as we move along. But from his emotion, God always still was there for him, in spite of him taking things into his own control and ways and not seeking God, as you stated, for guidance. So as we go on, we do hear about his people being the first to turn him in to the Philistines, and the Philistines basically taking him on and his vengeance against them as it goes on. Does anybody else have anything to add as we continue on as far as what he did when he found out the death of his wife and her father? No? Yes? Maybe so? No? All right. So we're going to read on about what Samson, I do feel that he did accomplish his purpose, but it was probably with difficulty because of his strong head, and is what I call it, and him getting out of God's will, because we understand, as we're taught here, that God will let us have our own will, that it's not his way and his will for our life. He's going to get the victory, as we talk about in our study. We talk about basically the seed. He planted the seed, but maybe somebody else, as we know, took over after him. The same with Moses. They all, somebody else went and watered it, but at the end, who still gets the glory? God. All right, so, yes, ma'am.
So even though his own people betrayed him, when his people came to get him to turn him over, he didn't fight them.
Right.
And he still knew what he had done. And so I think he did have some element of faith in that he could beat his enemies, that he could overcome them. And so he wasn't going to fight, because of the fight that he was battling was greater in his mind than what these people were coming, greater than what could be seen with the eye. And I don't know, that speaks to a deeper depth of his understanding of what's going on as far as being used by God and vengeance.
That's good. That, steps into I don't see my note, but my other notes about, as we read on about him. And I want you to pin that, what you said as far as he see. It was a mindset thing. And we always say that things starts in the mind, but it has to also be aligned with the heart. And if it's not aligned with the heart and the mind takes over, then you become what? Carnal. So you can't see God's ways and his purpose and his vision for your life, because your spirit man has been diminished in the process of doing that. So that's where Samson, leading with your emotions, will cause those things of you and not of God to take precedence and rise up in you. As we go on and we see, I believe that he never lost confidence, even when he knew he was out of order, as we say in the world. He never lost confidence. So when he gave himself over to the Philistines, he asked for them not to hurt him. It reminded me so much when I read that of the Christ. It wasn't, I don't want you to do it because I'm aware of what's going to happen. And he saved his own people in the process. But their fear took control of them, which allowed the betrayal to happen. So with that being said, I mean, if you look at life today, how many times have we allowed fear or some vice? It doesn't have to necessarily be a person. It could be a thing. It could be just as simple as a situation to take over our life and take us off our path of the purpose that God has for us. I mean, it could be something as simple as your job, your kids, food, shopping. Oh, that's one of mine. But, you have a purpose and a plan for something, but you let your emotions and your wants and desires take you from the purpose of what God has you on. That doesn't mean that he doesn't forgive. He is a merciful God. He's a forgiving God. As we see in Samson's life, that he does, still, accomplish his purpose that God had for him. Yes, ma'am.
It's ironic that you say that because yesterday, and I had to be honest with myself, yesterday, I couldn't pray. I had to text one of the other sisters and ask her to pray because I knew if I prayed, I would have prayed the wrong prayer.
But you were aware.
But I was aware because I know how powerful my words are because once they are released, I planted that seed.
Right.
And it takes triple, sometimes triple on top of triple to dig that seed back up because.
Right.
Yeah.
But then how long would that take you off of your plan if you were to do that?
Yeah.
So,
I knew, but I had to say the right words and ask somebody else to pray. I need you to pray right now.
Exactly.
Because I had some stuff going on up here, and I said, oh, my God, no, Lord, let me send this text real quick. I need you to pray right now.
Right.
Sin. Almost broke the glass on my screen. I hit sin so hard. Amen. I mean, seriously, because I was going through some stuff.
And being honest,
you have
with
to.
where we at is
Amen.
important. So you can know to call on, your prayer partner, that wise counsel, to lead you back on your path. And most of the time, we let embarrassment or fear, pride, exactly, to get us from that point and take us back so that we can fulfill what we have. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say how important it was for Sister Vanessa to share what she shared, because if we can be honest with ourselves, in the religious state that we used to be in, for a leader to say something like that was almost taboo.
Right.
So I just appreciate her for sharing and being transparent with everyone else about a moment that she had yesterday, because it's very rare for you to see a leader to be transparent. Not the pastors, I'm talking about the other leaders in the church, to be transparent like that, because we have to put up this front, or in religion, we have to put up this front like everything is okay and that we're perfect and we're sanctified, and that's not the reality of our life. Sure. And at that point, it also is damaging to the people, and it's also damaging to the leader, because then they feel like they have to portray a certain way, because they don't want the people to see that they have moments. And then it brings a whole nother spirit that's going to take us in another direction. But it brings a whole bunch of other spirits that can pretty much, if you allow it to, take you out, take you down, however you want to look at it. So I just thank you for being transparent.
That is true, because a lot of people don't want to let go of the past. They don't want to let go of the religion because they feel that that is a foundation, but it's not. What God has for them. And when you let go of the past and let go of the religion and any other sin or vices that you have in your life, then you allow yourself to draw closer to God, and for God to be able to use you and, change your heart and align your mind with your heart so that he can let your spirit rise and push you forward into purpose. Yes, ma'am. Miss Penny, did you have your hand up?
Yes, ma'am. So what Sister Vanessa was saying, that's good. And even those two comments, because we have to realize, and it helps me as well, because even in those weak moments, even in those emotional moments, we have to realize that we are still who God says we are.
Amen.
Who God created us to be, and that we have to be careful of the words that comes out of our mouth because of the power those words still have. And regardless of how we feel at that time, in that moment, it can still create something that, my God, it can still create something that we don't want. Unknowing.
Yes.
Unknowing. So that's good. Thank you.
That's good. That's good. Thank you, everyone. Yes, sir.
But the other thing I was going to say, Sister Rhonda, is, when you look at Samson and by him operating out of his soul for a moment, when you look at most of the individuals within the Hall of Faith, each one of them had a soulish moment.
Yes.
Yet it did not stop them from still making the Hall of Faith. So even Christ had a moment where he fell into a soulish state, but it did not stop him from realizing who he was, what his purpose was, fulfilling that purpose for God and the kingdom and for humanity. Yeah. So at the same time, as Pastor say, it's okay to get an emotional state. It's what we do when we're in our soulish state.
Yes.
And in this instance, it was Samson. Samson had so much strength that his strength, not meant for violence, can be used for violence. Right. And by him knowing that, yes, he did have that moment. Hey, it's kind of like I'm sitting in the gym, and I'm the biggest dude in the gym. I'm big swole right now. I go in the gym, and I dare anybody to mess with me, 500 pounds on your neck, and I'm good, Right. But knowing your strength and being able to use that, and so forth. But him, as you said, there's a connection between the mind and the heart. And the heart, where the spirit lives, allows you to operate through your mind, and as Vanessa said, out of your mouth, those words that you may speak. And I like what Vanessa said. Vanessa's a strong, powerful prayer warrior. And for a prayer warrior to say that she had to call on somebody else, you look at the Christ, who the Christ is, and that moment that he had, being who he was, and having to call on two other people to take with him and say, pray for me, while I go up, and so forth. But and I think that speak boundaries for leaders and those that are in those positions to be able to do that and say, hey, I have this moment. I need you to do this for me so that I'm not acting out of my soulish state or saying something, as Vanessa said, out of my soulish state that's going to release something that should not be released. Yes. And I know that in my past, I have done that. I have said some things, and it's like, okay, well, wow. Not knowing what I know now, I released something then that changed some things in my life that now I have to rely and trust God to put it back on path. Exactly. Because only God can undo that seed that you have sown. So we can't go back and dig it up and say, okay, once it's released, it's released. That seed is out there. So we have to rely on, as Christ said, Lord, forgive them. As Christ said, Lord, forgive them for what they did. So he had to release something to cover that up of what they had done, because they had released a seed of hatred and so forth against the Christ. So, but he knew that he had to still die for them in order to save them from the sins that they were doing to him. Exactly. So he had to cover that up. So a lot of times, yes, we may do things, and I know I'm guilty of it. I've said many things and probably have said some things that Sister Penny said unknowingly, or did some things unknowingly that changed the course of things in my life that shouldn't be there, that cause other ripple effects to happen. And I give a prime example of that. As Vitellis and I were building our home, there are things that happen in our home that should not have happened. As much as we've prayed over our home and so forth, there are things that we had in our plan for our home that we acted against. And it was a plan that we had brought before between the both of us, agreed to and so forth. And then we kind of sat down and we said, we allowed things to happen that shouldn't have happened, and we just kind of accepted it. And by accepting those things, it caused other things in our kingdom to happen. So now we're at the point now, it's like, okay, well, yes, let's get back to God and God's plan, and not doing things because we're like, oh yeah, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that. It's okay to want, but is that one is still in line with your plan?
Right, yeah.
And we did some things that weren't in the plan that we probably should have waited on, and we spoke some things in our home that we probably should not have spoken, and allowed people to do things in our lives that we never should have allowed happen. So therefore, there are those things that happen. Does that mean that me and Vitellis don't have faith? No, it doesn't. Does that mean that we still won't be seen in the eyes of God as good and faithful servants? No, it doesn't. But again, we have to realize that, yes, not saying it's okay for you to go in your solar state and do things and say things. That's not what I'm saying. But those things happen. Those moments happen. And being able to connect that, as you said, with the spirit and the heart, transforming the mind and speaking the words of faith out of your mouth can prevent a lot of those things from happening.
Amen. Thank you, Brother Vincent. One thing that you said, and tying back to Vanessa, but also relaying it back to Samson, who we're talking about, you have to be careful. She was wise enough, even in her emotional state, to know who to call and who to confide in, because you have to be careful of that, because what Samson did was he planted seeds, but the seeds that he planted, what were those ears that it fell on? Look what the harvest became. Something that was not of God, and something that was not in line with his purpose, something that can bless him. See, we sometimes as people concentrate on what others think, or their efforts on, our efforts of what it can get us, basing it off of our wants and our emotional stance, instead of what that has to do with our purpose and aligning it with God. So I like when she said she chose another woman of God. Samson chose people, not people of God, but just people, which we all are of God, but we choose the way we walk. But he chose those people, which made it fall and created a harvest of other things instead of the harvest of God, and aligning it with his purpose that he had. And that was something that he did often. When you hear them talk about his riddles and what he did, he told his wife, who in turn told the other people, and he knew that it came straight from her. But you would think, and how many times do we do this? You would think being betrayed once will put it in your memory bank, not to let the next person, be what's the word I'm looking for? From another person's mistakes. You're not put it on another person, is what I'm trying to say. But he did the same thing throughout his life. He chose the wrong people to speak into his personal plan that God had for his life. Yes, ma'am.
So I like looking at, trying to see if there's any meaning in like the names of places and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And there was a difference in how he responded to the different betrayals, right? When it was the father-in-law, and then, he did the foxes and all that. And then when it was a town, he was even angrier, and then, caused more destruction. But then when he went to Edom, Etam, like it was like a rock. And then I started looking up like a little bit of history. It was like a rock, a cave. It talks about it being pools of refreshing, where even King Solomon himself would go to refresh himself. Mm-hmm. And so there's some kind of meaning there that the rock and that place of refuge and rejuvenation is representative of Christ. Mm-hmm. And so when he went there for his soul to for him to unwind or whatever, just seek some solace, his response to the betrayal was completely different. He didn't just not respond, he gave himself.
I agree with that, but one thing that I saw, and thank you, Jay, because you brought that back to me, he still didn't allow his mind to be clean and clear. because if he did, his response each time would have taken him back to the previous things, to not let a betrayal on a betrayal to cause his anger to grow and his defense of what was being done to manifest more and more. Yes, it did take him down the path that God had for him, because he killed Philistines, which was his purpose, to lead the people, to lead God's people free. But he didn't, in my opinion, didn't go all the way into his heart and his soul to allow it to be cleansed. And again, which in turn allowed him to still use his anger as well as not wise counsel. He chose still carnal people to bear his soul and his secrets too. All right. So we're going to move on, and we stopped at, I believe it was 14. 14. And he came to Lehi, and the Philistines came shouting to meet him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon Samson, and the ropes on his arm became as flax that had caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And he found a still moist jawbone of a donkey, and reached out and took it and slew 1,000 men with it. So I'm going to stop right there again. So when you look up a jawbone of a donkey, along with the strength that Samson was given from God, and they said God met him, in spite of what he had just did, in spite of him using his emotions, God was still with him. Now, when you look at a jawbone of a donkey, I assume that it could fit in the palm of his hand, but it said that it was 4 times stronger than steel. So along with his strength and that jawbone by himself, and it doesn't tell exactly what the army had as they were coming towards him. But he still was able to kill 1,000 men. How many times have we allowed things that we can see that seem bigger than us to bring about fear, that we often give in and not move forward in what we know, or we lose lack of faith in ourselves first, and then God, that he won't bring us through. It never once in there says how he flinched when he saw it was 1,000 men, how he doubted. He stayed, thank you, Lamar. He stayed focused enough that he can search what was around him. How many of us would have saw a donkey jawbone and actually used that if we were about to be attacked? Will we even use our eyes to see that as a weapon? Sometimes God has things right in front of us that could help us in any given situation, but we take and use it for what it is and not what it can become and how it can bless us or take us to that next step. A jawbone. When I read that, I couldn't, in all honesty, that's where I stopped at, because I could not get past that. When I went and had to look up some images of it and did some research on it, how even just a pen could be a weapon. Do we look at a pen as a weapon? Probably so. Well, let's try to take something different, my glasses, and wipe out a whole army with something as simple as a jawbone. We would have been like, oh, no, that's something dead. It may have been foul. It may have been, it was a dead animal.
You just made me think about something when you said it. we have our glasses and we can use that as a weapon. But something as simple as that. But the word tells us that we can use our words, and think about how simple words can be, but at the same time how powerful and how strong words can be. The words tell us that life and death is in the power of our tongue, but we don't really believe that because we don't use our words. Right. And Pastor Ben has taught us that quite often, that words were first meant to create, but we don't use our words to create. We don't think about our words as a tool, to create. And it goes back to Miss Vanessa's situation where she got upset, but she knows the power of her words. Well, she knows the power of her words, so she didn't say anything. She called somebody else to speak on her behalf, to go to God for her, because she knew the power of her words. But words are very simplistic, but very powerful, and we don't even look at it that way.
And another thing, he didn't even have to speak a word because he knew God was already there with him. So God gave him the ability to look at something, And that
goes back to your faith.
Exactly. So we asked, why was he in the Hall of Faith? It was because he automatically knew God was with him. So that gave him the vision to look with his spirit man eyes, not his natural eyes, to see what he saw with that jawbone. I'm going to go to Marcus and then Keith and then Lamont. Who has the mic? Go ahead first, Lamont, since the mic is near you, if you don't mind.
Yes. Yes. Dealing with Samson was he was very strong.
Very.
But he never allowed anyone to allow any doubt to step in. He knew who he was, and he knew that God was going to be there for him. He just never had that doubt.
Never.
He'd always trusted God. I don't want to get too far, but even certain things that happened, Samson still believed. He just believed. But I look at us as human beings. A lot of times we will allow circumstances to get in our way, to where we doubt who we really are.
Exactly.
We doubt the giftings that God placed in us, and that's what I like about Miss Vanessa. She know who she is, and by knowing who you are, that what gives you the ability to say, I can't do this.
Yes.
That's what gives you the ability to say, if I do this, this is going to happen.
Yes.
But that's the same thing with Samson. He knew who he was. He knew. He had no doubt. But that's why even with fear, when fear come in, we recognize that fear is not of God. Fear is an attack from the enemy to kind of frustrate you, to cause you to begin to doubt, to where you can't stand and allow God to work through you. We just can't do it. So with all that being said, I believe this. Every man should always understand who they are.
Yes.
Know your gift, and just know who you are in life. And that's basically what Samson did. His strength was his weapon, and he used it to the best of his ability with that bone. Good God about it.
Yes. All right.
I was looking at the scripture, and you mentioned something about it being something so small. He made something big out of something so small. In this situation, it's like because of his anointing, automatically in the situation he went to his God nature.
Yes.
Where he saw a jawbone and saw a weapon. How God saw dirt and saw a man.
Yes.
And how some black people see a butter knife and see a screwdriver. It's the same thing. So, but it's something.
I like that. I like that.
But it's something so small that it makes me realize that people that's trying to start businesses are trying to make millions. They see the $10 and just see gas money, but they don't see $10 million.
Right.
They don't see an investment. We have to change our mind and get back into our God-like nature.
Yes.
Seeing something small, it may look small, but it's big.
Yes.
We can make it big because of our God-like abilities.
Amen. Amen. Go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, when he seen the jawbone, but he knew what he had to do. So he knew his purpose, and that jawbone would help him to fulfill his purpose.
True.
And I was just thinking, like, on how today, though, as I try to find my purpose, or many others may try to find their purpose, how hard it is, because sometimes we're led or guided before we can even talk. I may think that our purpose is this or our purpose is that, and that takes us off the path of our true purpose. You know, I look at the point of, like, sometimes you're thinking the purpose in life is the family and the 2.5 kids in the house and everything. When you get that, there's still that void there, because you didn't really maybe truly fulfill your true purpose of what it is. But the world will make you think this is your purpose. So today I try to pray and meditate and ask God, what is my purpose? What is my reason? And not let outside influences, outside forces direct me.
That falls back to what I was saying, how some of us as people concentrate on our own efforts or the efforts of those around us instead of God first.
Yeah.
So if you will learn to, all of us need to learn to listen to the voice of God and not necessarily to man. That takes us back to speaking our words. Sometimes it isn't even the outside forces, it's things that we've drummed up in our mind, which has now become something that has grown in our heart and that we meditate on, be it positive or negative, which allow those negative distractions to come in and take us off of our path. So we still continue down that path trying to make it right because we're using what? Our own efforts and not God's. So the world can teach us things, but God can teach us better. So,
thank you.
You're welcome. Miss Penny.
Okay, there was a number of things that was said that was very good, but I want to go back to a couple of people said about the things that's around you, talking about the jawbone, talking about the butter knife and all that good stuff. Look at, we tend to sometimes look at the size of the thing.
Yes.
And look at David. He used what? A stone, a small
Yes.
thing, okay, to kill a giant.
Yes.
So once again, that goes back to the focus and who we are, knowing who we are, and as Brother Keith was saying, going to the purpose. And I think somebody, matter of fact, again, Brother Mark is talking about the gifts.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that's, I think, since yesterday is stirring in me, because a lot of times we come and we do, but are we being? So who have he created us to be? And when he talk about that void is there because we're trying to fill this void or these voids with what we think or what we assume that is what we're supposed to be doing. And then it leads us back to what? That dry place. And then what do we want to do? We want to say, okay, this is not working. God, what is it? And we get discouraged. So we have to understand, once again, who we are. Who we are.
Amen. But yeah, that takes us back to we put our heart and our spirit in a dormant state, and we act out of our own efforts, and expect God to always align with what we say when we ain't even went to him in the first place to see what his purpose and plan is for our life. Though it's our efforts. And yeah, it does fall back to something like, that's why I said I stopped at the jawbone, because it was small. Again, like you said, it was something small. But it says it was 4 times as powerful as steel, but it was small. That's why I use my glasses as an analogy. God created everything. So it's up to you to use your spirit and your words to turn something. It was his being with God, him allowing God to guide him. Yes, he killed many, And that was part of his plan and his purpose to free the people. As we look at the men that made, and women that made the Hall of Faith, they all had a purpose to help God's people. Whereas we sit and look at our purpose in life is for us. We forget the extra part that is for the others and the people around us that God align us with to help, or to help us, as Vanessa did today. She found someone, that was walking in it, the same spirit that she is, so that her words wouldn't go forth, because she knows who she is and the power of them. Samson knew who he was and the power behind what he did, but he still allowed his own emotions in some states to take control and not allow God to reign. Yes, ma'am.
And also that purpose also, it leads back to God.
Yes.
To the glorifying of God.
Why were you born?
That's
Isn't that
it.
what we always ask here?
That's it. We're here. The Bible said we are no longer our own.
Yes.
We was bought with a price. So we're here to glorify God. It's not about us, not about what we want, what we desire. We benefit from it as long as we do the will of the Father. It's about him being glorified.
Yes, a lot of us, are here and we know, but who actually act? Who actually act on it? Yes, ma'am.
So I just wanted to share that. So in the career path that I've chosen, I deal with a lot of people who have mental illness or like substance abuse. And when I was in the military, I had a real hard time communicating with a lot of the service members, because a lot of people was like, well, you can't exercise your faith, or you couldn't talk about your spiritual belief with them. But I found that it was something that they wanted, and because they were actually told that they could not do it, it was stigmatized pretty much. And when I would talk to them and encourage them in their faith, they really needed that, and it helped them. And a lot of people in the beginning would like to have that title. I got PTSD, or I got this, or I got that.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like they receive it so well when it's a diagnosis, but they don't accept that as a spiritual warfare. And I'm just grateful that I'm in a position where I can communicate to those individuals that, this is what society said, but this is what God said. And a lot of times when you talk to them, you feel like you understand that they are struggling with their actual faith.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And being able to communicate with people about that and help get them back on track, to help them see that, it's nothing crazy about what they're thinking or what they're feeling, and that it is real. And for me, I think I had a period where it kind of became this a stronger warfare for me, because it was like I had Jay here, and that was my partner when she came along, and that was helpful. That was a breath of fresh air for me. And it helps me get done what I needed to get done, because before she came, I felt my stuff steady going down and getting drained and not having enough strength. But it was also because I put myself in a position where I wasn't able to get fed. Mm-hmm. I was giving out what I had received, and I wasn't taking anything back in. So I think that is important that, when we go back to Samson and the whole jawbone thing for me, that jawbone for me was being able to see people need for advocating and supporting their spiritual belief, and helping them bring themselves to a place where they can see what God has for them, so that the struggle that they're actually experiencing is not so complicated, and they don't feel alone.
That's good. Yeah, we did you have your hand up? Did you have your hand up? No, go ahead.
Hello. Yes. One more thing I really love about Samson is Samson. He never worked outside really of what God gave him. Mm-hmm. He never tried to be something that God didn't call him to be.
Exactly.
He was himself.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times we err in certain things of trying to be someone that God didn't tell you to be. And that's why I feel like that's what allowed him to be victorious. He stayed true to himself. And when you're true to yourself, God gonna always give you a way out. And that's what I truly believe. And y'all don't know how much y'all are helping me today. But there's a whole lot of things I wanted to say, but I'm hearing these things come forth today when Miss Vanessa was saying what she was saying. You know, she's a leader, but she chose to reach for help, to say, I can't do this right now. And to me, my opinion, that's somebody that know who they are. Mm-hmm. And that's victory all within itself. That's victory. You know, so y'all.
And we're going to wrap this up, but I wanted to just say that, you know, when you know who you are, as Samson did, but when he led astray from God, he took his purpose in life and used pride and his purpose and his special gifts in an ungodly way. So I want you to take from this week, what is your purpose? What has God given you? And are you using it for the glory of God or for selfish purposes? So don't let pride cause you to miss your blessings of what God has for you. Amen? Amen. All right. Thank you, everybody.